So today we're going to be looking at the Pulsar Massive. So Pulsar is a company that I have a lot of regard for. I've got their MU compressor plugin, and I really like that a lot. I've had it for quite a long time and I use it a lot. It's something I go back to again and again. It just has a lot of subtlety to it, I guess you could say, in terms of the way that the saturation interacts with the compression curves, and it's just kind of impossible to make it sound bad, and it just often brings some real life and weight to things without necessarily sounding like you've compressed it too much. Yeah, I really like it a lot. So I thought this company has something a bit extra in their coding. They seem to go very deep into modeling the hardware, and so when this one came out I thought I've got to check this out because I really like the Massive Passive style of EQ, and so I thought they've probably done something really good, and they have. They've done an amazing job on this. I have to say it sounds fantastic, as you'll hear, and we're going to go through this and look at the controls and have a listen to it on a mix. Because this is kind of a mastering EQ, although you could use it on anything. I'm going to show it to you in that context of hearing it on a mix on the 2-bus. And before we get started, if you could give the video a like and ring the bell and subscribe, that's really helpful to me and really appreciate it. So let's have a look. So here we are with the Pulsar Massive, and I'm going to start by just playing you a bit before and after. You can see this is a pretty straightforward curve I've got going on here. So it's a bit of a boost in the low end, a bit of a cut in the lower mids, and a bit of air at the top, just so you can hear what this sounds like before we get into the details. So I'm going to start with it in, and then I'm going to take it out. So you can hear what it sounds like. It's got a really, I've got to say, a really nice sound to it. It adds a lot of harmonics, and but in such a nice way. And I'm, from reading the manual, inferring they seem to refer to dynamic behavior of some of the bends, and I'm guessing in context of harmonics and things. So I'm guessing that there's a lot of stuff, dynamic stuff going on there in terms of the harmonic content and so forth. And so another thing that interestingly points to that is these two little meters here, which show you the RMS of the input versus the output. And if you watch those, they don't react in a linear way at all. So there's clearly stuff going on under the hood here which is of interest, and the sound is the real interest, obviously. And to me, this is sounding really nice and detailed. And when you put it in, obviously you get the EQ curve, but you also get a revealing of detail. The sound stage opens up. You get a significantly more punch in the low end, which a lot of EQ boosts won't give you. And you get a really smooth top end, even though there's quite a bit of boost going on here. It doesn't sound in any way harsh. And as well, here it actually makes it sound less harsh with the boost than without. So yeah, before we get into all of that, let's have a look at the controls we've got. So this isn't going to be an exhaustive walkthrough. I'm just going to give you kind of some rough ideas of what it can do. It's based on the mainly Massive Passive EQ. I've got several other plugins that do this. Acoustica one and the Native Instruments ones are two that I like particularly, but having spent some time with this, I'm sure at this stage that this is going to be the one I use because more than the others, just because it has such a nice sound to it, and it's more versatile than either of those. So let's start here. We've got 4 bands, and they can be separated into left and right by unlinking left and right here, or MS there. So in each of the bands you've got a choice of shelf or bell, and let's have a look at those. So you've got the stepped controls from the hardware, and you can actually lock, sorry, that's locking the parameter, I don't want to do that. You can actually up here put in stepped frequencies so they click to the steps of the original hardware, or you can turn that off, which is, yeah, possibly useful. I mean, once I've got it unstepped, I'm immediately going to want to do that. So, and you can drag up here as well, which, like, you know, a normal digital EQ, which is pretty amazing that they've got the sound of a massive passive but giving you complete freedom frequency wise. And then you've got here I'm going to just turn these other ones off here so you can just see this on its own. So we've got bell here, and you can see that this changes the I'm going to move this up so you can see the shape. It changes from a very flat wide bell to a more steep bell, which is still like fairly wide. It's certainly not surgical, and it's got a nice the scale here adjusts as you move this up, so that you keep a pretty amount of detail. When you go up really high, it does get proportional, and you get more of a steeper peak up here. But so it's quite complex what you get here. But down in the kind of more moderate settings, this is you can see here, this is a boost of 5 dB. It's still pretty broad, and when you turn this down, it kind of flattens the top as well as making it more broad. So kind of a unique shape. So you get, I believe it's the same on all bands in terms of the shapes. Not 100% sure about that. I'm pretty sure it looks like it is the same. It may not be. That'd be an interesting thing to actually check that, but I'm not going to do that. And then you've got the shelves. So the shelves are interesting because if I switch this to shelf, you can see that there's something interesting going on here. So if you turn the Q all the way to the left, you can see it's a kind of traditional shelf. It kind of is and kind of isn't. You get the shelf going up here, and then it kind of flattens out and then goes up again a bit at the end, which is kind of interesting. You can see I'm just moving the frequency here. So it's a little bit more complex of a shape than you'd get in a normal shelf. But as I turn this up, you'll notice that you get a dip and a rise here. So, and as I turn this up even more, the dip and rise gets even more accentuated. So it becomes like a Pultec style EQ, where it gives you a boost a bit above where the corner frequency of the shelf is. So you get a Pultec kind of thing happening, which is quite interesting and, you know, potentially extremely useful. That's if you've got the Q turned all the way over here, and as you bring it back, it gives you a whole range of different kind of shapes until you go right the way back to something close to a normal shelf. So that's, of course, again, unique to the hardware, but I have to say, having compared, assuming that this is accurate, and I'm guessing it is, comparing this to the Acoustica one, for example, the shapes are different, a bit different. They're not the same, but it might be because they, you know, model specific units which do vary, but similar. So, okay, that's the EQ bands. Then, as I mentioned, the MS and left and right, you can separate them and so forth. You've got a high pass filter here. all can be separated MS if you need to, and a low pass, which gives you a bump here, as you can see going on there, which is interesting. Let's turn off this and see what the low pass does without any other filters in, and you can see it's pretty much straightforward, whereas the high pass is giving you a kind of interesting bump. I haven't got anything else turned on here, have I? No, I don't think I have. So that is just part of the low pass filter. It's got a resonant peak here, which is interesting. Then what we have is a drive control, and this drives the input transformer emulation. So it's adding harmonics, but from the manual it's not just adding harmonics, it's specific non-linearities from the kind of input transformers used in the original hardware. And here you have a switch which can give you a modified transformer, which adds more richness with the loss of some transient response according to the manual. But I have to say, even with this in, which we had a minute ago when we were listening, it was very punchy on the low end. So you can drive this up obviously and get a lot more harmonics, rich harmonics come in. It's a very nice sound, presumably true to the original hardware. Or you can pull it right back. And then you've got the output gain. So this is the only bit which I'd like to have seen one extra control in here. This controls your output gain, but it also drives output transformers. So you get added harmonics, a different type of harmonics as you drive the output. But what I would like to have seen is another gain control, so that when you get peaks up here, you can kind of pull it down without affecting the sound, because these will affect the sound. So yeah, it would be nice to have a trim control somewhere to just do that, but it's not a big deal. And then we have an auto gain here, which compensates for the boosts. So yeah, and there's some other details, but that's the basics of it. It's got a spectrograph here, and as I've said already, it's got the display here that you can use instead of using the dials here if you want. In here we've got various things. Oversampling, which, you know, in my view, every plugin that adds any kind of saturation or harmonic should have. I've recently started looking at some of the aliasing caused by plugins and noticed just how bad they are on some of them, like even from, you know, Plugin Alliance and Sound Toys and things. There's some pretty extreme aliasing going on with some of their saturation plugins. And if it sounds good, it is good, but I'd rather have the option to get rid of it. And so that's what they give you here, 2 and 4 times. And I haven't tested this, but I'm guessing it at 4 times the aliasing is gone. So that's really nice, and in my view, it's kind of essential these days to have that, and I just don't know why all plugin manufacturers don't give you that option. So we've got that, and yeah, I think that's everything we need to go through here. So now let's have a play around with this and see what it's like if I mess with the controls. So this is on the 2 bus. I'm just going to go back to that setting we had a minute ago, and I'm just going to start to play about with the low end and the high end so you can get an idea of how it sounds. So we'll start with it in and keep it in, and I'll start to play about. So we'll do a bit, I think, in stereo, and then we'll do some with MS. So in particular, it might be worth just listening to that high end and the low end punch you get. So I'm going to pull in and out, first of all, I think, the low end here, so you can just hear it's not just boosting the low end, it's actually adding punch to it, which not all EQs do in the same kind of way. In the high end, I'm going to pull that in and out, and you can just listen to when the cymbals hit, how it's super smooth. I would say it's even smoother with the EQ in, even though it's boosted quite a bit, than it is with it out. So start with the low end in and out, and then the high end, and then I'm going to start to mess about. have to say, even the bass sounds more punchy with this in, which is an interesting effect. Okay, so let's go now for the high end. Play that section again because there's a cymbal hit there without that, and then I'll play it again with it. So you can hear, even though it's really boosted a lot, it's not sounding in any way harsh, it's sounding really smooth. And in some sections I've noticed that pulling it out, it actually sounds more smooth when it's in. Okay, so now I'm going to just start messing about with the controls. Okay, so hopefully that gives you an idea of the general sound of sweeping around EQs. It always sounds really nice. It's just very creamy in the mid-range, really smooth and silky in the highs, punchy and weighty in the lows. Yeah, just really sounds great everywhere, and very easy to dial in a nice sound. It's more like, instead of finding a nice sound, like everything you do sounds like another variation on nice. Is how I'm feeling about this EQ. It really does sound great. So let's have a little play around with the drive now. I've got some drive here, as you can see, and then I've got a preset here in the B memory, which is the same with more drives, so we can A and B back and forth between that. So have a listen to that. So I don't think you can really tell much by driving these gains, because it actually raises the volume up, like what effect it has on the sound particularly. But what I really liked is that you can drive this and it doesn't affect the volume, the perceived volume, which I just wish more plugins did that. It's such a useful way of doing, a more modern way of working with these things, I find. It's one thing emulating hardware, it's another thing kind of leaving people with the restrictions of hardware, like why do that? And that's what's great about this. It would be just great if they could do the same with the gain knob here, but that's a very, very small thing. So let's just have a listen to the filters. I think it's the one thing we haven't done, and then we'll do a bit of MS. So what I'll do is I'm just going to zero out these and then play with the filters a bit. So hopefully that gave you a bit of a flavor of the filters. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the high shelf here, and I'm going to open up another instance of this that is just on the overheads. Oh, that's one thing that's really nice as well. A completely freely resizable interface, really nice. Wish more plug-in manufacturers did that. And, you know, they've still got this perfect kind of hardware 3D thing, but it's, you know, completely resizable. Nicely done. So here what I've got is it's in MS mode, and I'm just boosting the highs, kind of air band 12K on the sides, and it's just on the overheads. And I'm also driven it a bit, so you can just hear what it can do in a kind of MS mode on the high end. I mean, there is so much you can do with this, especially with the MS. The possibilities are endless for mastering, and for, you know, individual instruments, of course, as well. So yeah, I think this sounds fantastic. It's an amazing plugin by Pulsar. It really does add more than a normal EQ. You get a serious amount of punch and richness and sheen on the top end, and the curves just make it really easy to use to dial in a really great sound. And it for me, it's tighter and more predictable than, say, the Acustica one, which I really like, but I find it kind of unwieldy, and the low end very quickly on that one gets too bloomy and muddy. It kind of blooms up, and it can get quite muddy if you're not really careful. This one, that just doesn't happen. It's tight and punchy regardless of what you do. Fantastic. You can just dial in something great sounding pretty much with anything you do, which to my ears definitely raises it above the other ones that I've used. So yeah, a big thumbs up from me on this one. I think it's really great. I'm going to be using this a lot. Sounds fantastic. So congratulations to Pulsar on that. And I hope you found this video useful. If you did, please do give it a like and subscribe and ring the bell, and hope to see you next time.